cabinet meetings going forward. Here is something that is not secret. Our lives are about to change in a big way. The Finance Act that was passed in Parliament last week was signed into law this week on Monday by the President. And today we stand on the threshold of new fuel prices. Could be one of the highest jumps we've seen in a while. But now that our lives are changing, let's listen to the President who signed that bill into law, ushering in a new era in Kenyans' lives.
Wananijaribu nitawakalia ngumu kwa sababu Kenya hapana ya watu wachache. Si Kenya ni yetu sisi sote, my friend. Hata uweke sufuria kwa kichwa mara ngapi ama siku ngapi, bei ya chakula iweze kupungua. Tuambiane ukweli. Pengine sufuria, pengine tupike nayo sufuria kwa kichwa ya mtu.
So that was the President in response to, the calls for a boycott. I think there was the Kamkunji meeting that was held earlier this week. So here we are, Sam. Today, we've announced what IPRA might be doing tomorrow. That's the Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority. New fuel prices means what?
I mean, it means a lot of things. And look, like you have always said, and different experts have indicated that this country, we're still struggling with, for instance, the manufacturing sector. In fact, the contribution of manufacturing to GDP has reduced to 7.2%. It was more than 8%.
And the plan, by the way, by the ministry is to take it to 15%?
Oh, yes, that's the plan. That's a double-digit rate. And one of the big reasons that people have cited for the slow growth of the manufacturing sector has been the cost of energy, the cost of powering production. And so, of course, it has to happen because that is the law, and the law has to be implemented. There is no court injunction stopping the implementation of the Finance Act 2023. And therefore, from estimates, both from us here at Citizen, but also ISPAC, you see that there's a possibility that a litre of petrol will retail from 193 shillings starting Saturday, or if you like, the transition between Friday and Saturday. I don't know whether that's midnight or it's morning.
Midnight. You've been confused about this.
Yeah, and so that will happen, and obviously Kenyans will have to pay for it. If it's kerosene, it's rising by about 10 shillings. The diesel, again, a litre by about 10 shillings. So the implication will be real. We'll see what happens, and especially for those people that depend on either transport, depend on the fuel to produce, then this is going to really hit hard. And I'm also moved by, you saw what the Monetary Policy Committee did. And we had that on Data Point. There is the Central Bank Committee that looks into the monetary policy in the country, and them announcing a new central bank rate from 9.5 to 10.5%. And what they're trying to deal with is the inflation rate, which is on the rise. It had started to slow down, but now it's up at 8.3%. And they're attributing the rise of the inflation, that's a rate from May, they're attributing it to the rise in power prices, that is electricity. Remember the new tariffs that took effect on the 1st of April? What a fool's day we had. And then the other thing was the prices of sugar. You've seen what has happened to a kilo of sugar. And
almost 500 shillings for 2 kilos.
Policies that the government is proposing, including taxing it. You know how much? An import duty of 5 shillings per kilo of imported sugar to make sure that we reduce the intensity or the incidences of diabetes in the country. Well, whether you agree with that or not, it is what the Cabinet Secretary said. The other thing that has pushed inflation up has been fuel. So fuel is going to go up again this Saturday. So even if the Monetary Policy Committee is trying to come up with a new CBK rate, central bank rate, to contain inflation in the country, what happens when you raise the cost of living, the cost of fuel? The inflation starts to go up, and you're going to blame the cost of fuel. So what are we doing?
And you're right, it just has a spiral effect. And please note that IPRA will most likely have a second review on the 15th of, usually it's actually on the 14th of July, because this one is to factor in the new taxes, which take effect on the 1st of July. But I want us to listen to Kimani Kuria. He is, we will get back to him in a moment. And he is the chair of the Finance Committee, and he was giving a justification, for the signing of that and, what our laws mean. But Jamila?
Yeah, because him giving his justification and all that, we're talking about how this is going to affect the price of goods and services and inflation in terms of from transport to energy to manufacturing, electricity, because you have to factor in the higher cost of petroleum in all these industries and companies that manufacture goods, and the use of diesel for transportation, power generation, and running of agricultural machinery such as tractors and all that, which will have a direct impact on farm produce. That direct impact on farm produce, which means a direct impact on the cost of food and what you will have on your table. I think we can listen to a few Kenyans from different parts of the country talking about what they think about this increase in prices of fuel.
Naona ya mafuta tena ikiongeza kupita hapa mahali tumefikia, hiyo sasa kama sisi wana bodaboda, hii kazi yetu itakaa ngumu sana. Chuma customer waongezi pesa, hii kazi yetu sasa tunaona ni kama tutapaki hizi mapigipigi.
Kitu tu tunaomba kwamba sisi wa Kenya wacha tuvumilia, kama serikali iko na mwelekeo mzuri, tuvumilie kwa muda fulani tuona kama hiyo gharama ya kuongeza kwa bei ya mafuta itazaa matunda ama hapana.
And the increase in fuel affects all sectors because it's the prime mover of all sectors.
Kama mafuta itapanda, hata nasi tutaweza kuongeza fare. Sababu gari iwezi kuwa kwa barabara kama iwezi kujimaintain. Gari iwezi kuwa kwa barabara kama iwezi kujinunulia mikuu ama iwezi kujiweka license.
Raisi endelea kufanya kazi. Wasiendelee kuchokoza raisi, wacha raisi afanye kazi kabisa, kwa vile walikuwa wanaambiwa wafanye, hawataki kufanya. Mimi kwa maoni yangu wacha mafuta ifika hata 300.
Tafadhali waongeze pesa kidogo, hata kama ni 10 bob kwa ile, kama tulikuwa tunamchukua penye anastahili kufika na 50 bob, atuongezee 10 bob, ama ni 70 aongeze ikuwe 80. Tunaomba tu, si ati tunalazimisha kama serikali inaendelea kulazimisha.
Asikia tulazimishi kama serikali inaendelea kulazimisha. And this is basically what this would mean directly. Hakuna ati kutakuwa na cushioning, there isn't. Yeah. Because all these things are connected. Bei ya mafuta inapanda, bei ya bidhaa muhimu inapanda. And it's not like your income pia inapanda as a Mkenya wa kawaida. Already you're hearing the gentleman talking about how they'll have to increase nauli fare. Yeah. What does that mean? It's not like you're getting more money or your salary is increasing for you to be able to afford these goods. Now people have to start doing, having one meal a day, having less food, start having to cut down because you'll not be able to afford this basic commodity.
And remember, even for your customers, for whom you are increasing the fares, it's also tough on them because I know, previously when we've had significant increases in the price of fuel and we've talked to transport operators and they say they're also careful by how much they can increase. And so they also take up some of the cost on their end because they know a very high increase in the cost of fares will also result in them losing business because they know who their customers are and they know what they're able to pay and what they're not able to pay. That economy hits everybody. So, the customers, the passengers, the operators. And so you can raise your prices and you can price yourself out of the market. And so they also take up a little bit of that cost. I mean, you can imagine a border ride for a particular route that is 100 shillings. If you make that 150, 160, 170, then that same passenger will simply tell you, you know what, I can't afford this. So everybody loses, right? You stay with your hiked fares. How many passengers do you have in a day? The passenger says, well, I can't do it, so there will be some distances I might opt to walk instead. So it's going to be, a tough balancing act, like you say, for everyone. But then, Linus, then we saw the minority side and a number of others, including, Omtata, coming up and saying there's an issue. In fact, Omtata had filed, a petition against this even before it was passed, right? And if I'm not wrong, and you can correct me around the table, the court did decline to put in place an injunction against the implementation of it, sort of presumptive, for that as well. But Omtata is back in court and he's saying...
I think we have Omtata also speaking, Yvonne, if we can hear some of the concerns that he has, because he's amending his earlier petition to Parliament. He's questioning even the process of passing that bill into law. He's talking about how there were issues, there were provisions there that were touching
on county
governments and the Senate was not involved. And so maybe you can listen to Okiya Omtata talking about how some of those provisions that concern county governments were included in the bill but not taken to Senate.
There are many provisions which concern county governments, including the contentious housing issue, but they were not taken to the Senate. And in evidence, I produced a letter from the Speaker of the Senate to the Speaker of the National Assembly complaining as to how the Senate had been sidelined in the process, yet there were issues like even housing concerned the Senate.
Other than that, you also talked about what I've mentioned, the fact that the processes that were used, the procedural violations, they're saying there are some provisional violations in the passing of the bill by the National Assembly, saying that, well, the Act contained some amendments to other laws in the Constitution that had nothing to do with raising revenues. They are saying that his amended petition shows that the Act violated various provisions of the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. So maybe we can listen to him say that before Linus continues, how the appropriate Act was passed and that the budget did not have the revenue estimates. It only had expenditure estimates.
But you find a situation whereby the finance bill sort of preceded the Appropriations Act, so they were signed into law at the same time. So you wonder, well, these taxes, what are they being raised to finance? Because it's in the Appropriations Act that should give you the estimates for which taxes are levied to finance. You go back, you find that even in the budget did not have the revenue estimates. It only had expenditure estimates. Yet the Constitution at Article 221 requires that the estimates of revenue and estimates of expenditure must be clearly spelled out. So there are very, very many procedural infractions.
Well, he wants this case had a certificate of urgency because kesho itaanza kuwa implemented kwa sababu imekuwa sheria.
Kabla hii kesi yangu ijaangaliwa, so nimepeleka hoja kotini ya kuomba kwamba mahakama itoe amri ya kusimamisha hii sheria mpaka kesi itakaposikizwa. Ndio.
So, Linus, what hope is there of that? It's just one day tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think whichever day the court chooses to hear this matter, I think it's going to be such a huge moment of national conversation. It'll be very, very interesting to see what arguments Okiya Omtatah is going to put in place. He has already indicated that he's going to challenge specific clauses that he finds either unconstitutional or unprocedural, that they didn't follow the process to reach where they are. So this is going to be really, really interesting from the courts. This, in my view, will be similar to the national security laws cases that was heard some time back, because again, the court weighed in after. Yeah. After there was this very ecstatic performance in Parliament, including...
ecstatic. I like the choice of words.
Yes.
It was a little more...
It was quite an interesting evening. And I think the finance bill similarly had taken that kind of political contest between the ruling side and the opposition. It was a contest, just like the security laws. And what did the court do? The court did actually declare sections of the security laws as unconstitutional. So this is going to be really, really interesting, considering there are a number of things that, for example, that the finance bill now law moves to do. First of all, by creating different levels of taxes when it comes to income tax payee. You know, there's 35, there's 32.5, there's you know, I would like to hear what the court says about that in as far as the question of the Constitution, Article 201, sharing the burden of taxation in a fair way, because you could see there was this simplistic way of saying, if you're earning more, then you're taxed more. Remember, 30% of 500 is already more than 30% of 30,000, which again means that those people who are in the higher bracket were still paying what should have been considered quite a reasonable amount. I haven't perused Okiya's full petition, but I would really wait to hear what the courts say about public participation. Will the court, for the first time or yet again, bring the scale that has been lacking what is public participation, and when does it hold, or when does it prevail over the text that has been subjected to that conversation? Because in the finance bill, so many groups were heard. We televised that right through. But you could still see that in public participation, the minority had their way. You know, basically, the text of the the bill was retained as is, except for that little adjustment of the housing levy from 3 to 1.5%. So these are some of the issues that will make our courts really, really interesting in the the days going ahead. And look, courts are really a very important part of our national, can I say, sense and sobriety. Courts has sometimes, and many times actually, shed light in places where there is no light. Brought reason in places where there is no reason.
I have a question. So let's imagine that this is a scenario where the court listens to Umtata and says, suspend its implementation until the case is heard. By the time they make such a determination, the housing levy will have been, let's imagine that scenario, housing levy will have been collected. The fuel taxes, from 8% to 16% will already have been collected. What happens to the monies that we have paid? and then I just, look, so I'm just casting scenarios here, right? And then the court goes ahead, like, happened with the security amendment laws, and declares some sections of it unconstitutional. So let's imagine by the time, the case is heard and determined, the court says, oh, wait, hang on, the housing levy should have in fact been taken to the Senate because considering fine, it's a money bill, but it touched on housing, which is a devolved function, and therefore the Senate should have been involved, or that in fact, because the expenditure estimates were never tabled, that none of this is constitutional. And you've been paying higher taxes on fuel. And by the way, that is everybody, because as long as, even if you do not per se drive, you take a matatu, you take a boda boda, whatever it is. So what happens? Okay, though I know, I fear you're going to tell me it doesn't act.
Sorry?
It doesn't act retroactively.
Yes, absolutely. And the one thing that the courts will always, and have always been careful about, is doing something that leads to what they call an absurdity, or something that is impractical to implement. I mean, if the Act, APRA does releases the new rates tomorrow, you pay for fuel tomorrow evening, and then there's an order reversing that. You can't go to Shell and say,
Rudisha,
I fueled, give me the 8%. That's an absurdity. So I think we all just have to sit back and wait for the wisdom of the courts, because there's plenty of it out there, and they're going to navigate this in the best way possible. Remember, they'll also be careful not to ground things to a halt. Because this finance law now is what activates the budget that the government presented the other day. Without the mechanism to actually roll it out, then
to collect the taxes, that will then fund the budget. You can't talk. The budget becomes another absurdity again. So I think it's very it's a very tough moment for the courts. This is a very, very heavy petition before it. There are so many things and many interests that are at play. Let's see. Courts and judges, magistrates, they're trained to work. This is exactly what it is. Sam, quickly, as we take a break.
Yes, the last time there was an attempt to introduce a housing levy in the country, the matter was taken to court, and the court actually suspended that particular provision that was in the Finance Act. And it was suspended up until the matter was heard and determined. And eventually the determination was that you cannot have this. So depending on how persuasive the petitioner is in the filings, the judges may decide that this makes sense on the face of it, and therefore, before you determine it, he raises issues of constitutional concern and therefore may want to suspend. But that has to depend on how persuasive the petitioner is. Again, remember, recently there was the government-to-government deal of oil purchase from Gulf countries into the country. And Justice Ongudi was asking for the status quo report. It was so late in the day, so she wanted to know what is the status as of now. If you're expecting to have fuel in the following month, what mode will it follow? And when the status quo came, the status report came, it indicated that actually the country was expecting fuel or petroleum products from that government-to-government deal. And therefore she said, I cannot suspend this, because if I did, I'm going to affect the running of this economy. So they have to look at what's the greater good, what's the greater evil, and balancing that, then coming up with a decision that really doesn't affect the running of the government. So I highly doubt that there would be a suspension of the Finance Act, but provisions of it, I mean, some of the clauses of it may. Depending on how persuasive the petition is.
And did you say it's a balances of evils?
Yeah, which is the lesser or greater. All right, so let's take a break. When we come back, I'm afraid we have more taxes for you. Oh, by the way, there's a Mira levy. Just thought I'd put that out there. We're all going to pay taxes in this country. Nobody shall be left behind. But let's take a break. When we come back...
I hope you're joking on that one.
No, it's 2 bob. It was what? 2 shillings per kilo, I think.
Yes,
or something. Yeah.
Meru is watching.
Nasi stories are Jabba, by the way. Let's take a break. When we come back, more taxes. NHIF. That's coming up.